Welcome to Conversatio, the Belmont Abbey College podcast. This podcast aims to form and transform our community so that each of us can reflect God's image. I'm your host, Bridget, and today I'm joined with Dr. William K. Thierfelder, president of Belmont Abbey College, Coach John Keating, the head soccer coach for the men's team, and Adam Smith, Belmont Abbey College's assistant athletic director for sports medicine and head athletic trainer. Before we dive deep into our topic today, I'll let our guests more fully introduce themselves.
Well, I'm Bill Thierfelder. I'm the president of Belmont Abbey College and have a background in sport as an athlete, as a coach. I'm a sports psychologist. I've been in sports medicine, sports law, sports business, and I've been at Belmont Abbey for almost 20 years.
I'm John Keating, and I'm employed by this gentleman
for
12 wonderful years.
Yeah.
And as Bridget said, I'm the head men's soccer coach, and that's the group I work with primarily.
And you have a background in playing yourself.
I did play, myself.
It's hard to remember back
South
this
Africa.
far
It's been a
for
while.
us.
Yeah, and I played at West Virginia University before going into coaching, turning my back on a career in finance, and then landed up here from the Midwest.
Yeah. And can I just jump in and just say something? I know we're talking about a specific topic today, but one of my great joys was in the beginning of trying to move our sports programs to one of sport and virtue. John became aware that the program was open. We talked on the phone for a few minutes. As soon as I talked to him on the phone, I said, I got to meet him right away. So we flew him in. He and I sat down in the office. In the first 5 minutes, I said, first of all, what are the chances of someone being a Benedictine oblate?
Wow.
Who's a head soccer coach, who's played himself. I mean,
wow.
That's a God thing, right?
That's amazing.
So there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye, and he does an incredible job with the team in terms of every year they are brought and formed into understanding virtue, and in a way the rule of St. Benedict has been so well incorporated into all of it. So I just want to get that in because there's a lot more going on than...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also told Coach Keating before we started the podcast offline that I was so impressed with a video I watched of him where he was being interviewed and he said, all of these guys show up hoping to be soccer stars and all I care about is if they leave holy.
Right.
And I was like, what a mic drop, that is an amazing coach right there. So what about you, Adam?
Thanks. I'm Adam Smith. I'm athletic trainer by trade. I came here in 2008, mid-year after the position I was holding previously was eliminated, and I've been here ever since. I recently took over some assistant athletic director duties to help kind of guide the department as a whole and kind of look bigger picture in sports medicine on campus here.
Awesome.
And of course, me, I can't help but kibitz here, right? I just got to jump in on a few of these things.
Of course.
And, most people may not know, but Belmont Abbey College has the 7th largest athletic program in the United States. That's out of Division 1, 2, and 3.
Wow.
Adam is the head of all of sports medicine here, athletic training, and the work that takes, the dedication, the knowledge and experience is really remarkable. So again, there's no small things going on here.
Thank you.
And I think that's why we wanted to bring all three of you together, because with your background in sports psychology, with you as a coach and you as a head athletic trainer, the world really stopped last week when Damar Hamlin, fell in cardiac arrest, I guess is what they're saying. And so we wanted to bring you all together and say, as heads of these respective departments and teams and a college, what was going through your mind when you saw an injury like this take place on such a large national scale as people involved in sports?
I guess I'll jump in first. First responder. May make sense there. So, initially the first concern is the player okay? And you want the player to be okay. And it sounds trite, but the reaction, everyone sending up their thoughts and prayers. But you obviously want the player to be okay ultimately. For me, from an operational standpoint, the next thing I think of is what the emergency action plan that was activated probably almost instantaneously. All the different pieces of the care that were in place before the game even started in case something like that happened, and how world class that care is. Yeah. And it didn't even seem like it was a big deal, of course, but it wasn't. It was all rehearsed, and everyone knew what their role was in those moments.
Right.
And then thinking kind of outside of that, there's we do that same thing in a smaller scale here.
Right.
The types of injuries may be the same, but the it's more homegrown here, and we obviously don't have the resources that the NFL has to provide some of those things, but we still strive to provide a care experience that provides good outcomes, and a lot of those same elements are present in our emergency action plans that we rehearse, and we're very fortunate to have the support that we have here. With Caramount building a hospital in our backyard certainly is going to, shameless plug there, but it certainly is going to help, and it's going to only increase our ability to care for our athletes for sure.
Yeah, and I know that during that event, what you don't see behind the scenes that you're aware of because you're in that world, there were so many medical professionals instantaneously. I mean, they were bringing in doctors that had specialty in airway, clearing. I mean, all these things going on behind the scenes. It just looks like there's some people on the field kneeling next to a guy, but there are incredible decisions. And these individuals are so talented, like Adam, that they almost spot immediately what's going on. And so the what happened to him is called Commotio cordis, which is where it's a blunt force trauma to a chest. Many people may have seen it before especially happens like little leaguers, get hit with a baseball in the chest. Hockey players sometimes with a hockey puck. I mean, it's where you get struck in the heart, in the rib cage, right under the heart, and it just is one of those perfect scenarios where at the certain time of the beat, you get hit at that instant. Because if you look at the hit, it wasn't some vicious hit. I mean, matter of fact, the helmet was up. He didn't get speared or anything. It's just the way he got hit in an open chest, it was enough force, given probably the heartbeat and everything else, that it just stopped his heart. And it's very dangerous because it's the lower chamber. So it's that ventricular part of the heart that once it starts to go into fibrillation, it's not easy to stop.
Wow.
Yeah, for sure.
As a coach, what were you thinking when you saw
Full
it?
transparency, I have not watched it.
Okay.
And probably won't.
Yeah.
I would imagine it was very difficult for all of you to watch. Mm-hmm. When I heard about it, our athletics director had sent out a note saying, in light of the situation, and I thought, oh no, it's not an Abbey student. And I immediately thought of Adam because he's saved lives here before, under like same but different circumstances. Wow. So I was immediately thinking, this guy was already a hero in my eyes, he's done it again. And then I figured out the next day, oh, it wasn't a student, thank God. And it happened to this poor gent. But it did get me thinking about some of the heroic things that we've done, Adam's done with his staff at this place.
Wow.
So that's kind of where it stood. Since then, of course, I've read a lot about it without actually bringing myself to view it. But I can only imagine, I suppose. We'll leave it to the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, jumping right in, because we are a faith community, as a Christian Catholic community, what did it say to see the reaction of the country kind of really jumping into prayer? And, a lot of people say that culture now is not God-fearing any longer, and yet you see so many interviews coming out of his teammates saying that they immediately prayed, they immediately dropped to their knees. My husband played college football at the Naval Academy, and he's had multiple, unfortunately, have teammates die since he graduated. And, the funerals and the stories I've heard is that a lot of the guys that he played with who were not faithful in those moments came together for prayer. What do you guys, are there any thoughts that come to your mind in terms of how sports can bring this type of community together towards prayer and pointing to a higher power? Anyone want to jump into that?
Go ahead.
Good.
Well, I just wrote down the word transcendent. I think that's what sport at its best does. It helps us transcend day-to-day realities. And so we relegate sport to day-to-day realities, and then sometimes we elevate it beyond that, probably irreverently. But then in these moments, I think we recognize the transcendent value of human life conveyed to us in a sporting moment. So in a way, it's kind of sport done right, I think, the response, at least. The outcry, I think it touched a nerve for people that have maybe started to herald sport as a religion itself and realized
maybe God's
it's not where the religion's at.
Yeah, and I think the using your military there are no atheists in foxholes, right? So I think when we come down to these moments of either true suffering or death or threat of death and so forth, we get instant, I think, perspective. You can get caught up in all kinds of stuff, money, power, pain, pleasure, all of these kinds of things. But at that instant, when you're really face to face with the ultimate, which is, our lives and the end of someone's life that you love or that you're a teammate with, a friend with, or just even somebody you don't know who you just care as a human being for. I think, all of us, I believe, are made in the image and likeness of God. We have a soul. Our consciences are actually our connection to God that has that awareness. That's how we know when we're doing right and wrong typically. It usually comes right to us. So I think those instances just immediately focus in on what's actually really important in life. And when that happens, maybe, for some it comes instantly too. But when I think you start to see that reaction, those that maybe it didn't even come in instantly in the moment suddenly realize, wait a second, there's something going on, and everybody's recognizing the importance of just one life, by the way. So you talk about being pro-life, it's the value of that one individual.
Yeah, the word that came to my mind was inspiring. And outside of a few exceptions to some talking heads that may be looking for attention, but it was almost near unanimous support in everyone's praying for Damar. Right. And to think of how many times do we do anything in our life that has that level of kind of unanimous collective pull. And just the amount of seeds that were planted, like you were saying, like how many people wouldn't have even thought about that in that instance. But the tremendous reach that, just the couple posts on social media and the video, and everyone just pulling together for it.
And you hope it's not a bridge too far, but if we can feel that way about Damar, and everybody in the whole country is pulled together in that instant, they stop the game, and the importance of this life is more important than anything else going on. Hopefully, we can think a little further than that and just say, are there value to other lives?
Sure.
The unborn, or those that are less fortunate or weaker than us, or elderly, or whatever it might be. Do we get that perspective, and that kind of bring us back to reality, and to what's really true, what's really important in our lives, and are we focused on that, and not all the divisive stuff that I think sometimes we get caught up in tearing each other apart instead of loving each other and figuring out how do we love each other and live with each other.
Absolutely. Another thing to think about is the fact that this very important game ended up not even happening. What do you think this had an impact on in terms of priority? They stopped the game, they ended up not having it. Does this incident portray we kind of answered this in a roundabout way, what's important in life, and for it to happen on a large scale like the NFL? Are there any thoughts that come to mind about that?
I would just call back to your point about, what this really means, and my thing is there's obviously always a kind of temporal solution for these problems, right? But ultimately what we were talking about is someone's life at risk, and that's what's really important. And the NFL can figure out how to adjust the schedule for winning percentage, and thinking about where we put the game, we can't play, all those things are very temporal issues, and how do we, I think about from my standpoint, all these things that we deal with on a day-to-day, all the challenges about scheduling and facility issues, those are all temporal. Those are all those have solutions, that have their problems that'll get fixed, and how are we keeping what's really important, what's important.
And even just the way you said, this was an important game. Isn't it interesting that we put a certain this is really important. This is going to make a difference in our lives today, and certainly something we can enjoy and appreciate. And that's part of what sports so beautiful about, is that it does remind us of God. It does pull us to it, because we get to see a human being who's made in the image and likeness of God, usually doing maybe something extraordinary, something that lifts us up to contemplate something higher than ourselves. So there's a beauty in sport, and there's a goodness in sport. It has to be properly directed, as you brought up earlier. And if we're doing that, then it's a beautiful, good thing. It's when it sort of takes on some kind of false importance, that this is going to be, life and death. No, that's not life and death. Tomorrow on the field is life and death. And I think that's, again, what happened in that moment.
Absolutely. And it also highlights the risk of professional sports, and especially the violence of football. Is there anything that we could chat about in terms of that? In terms of, you said that you guys have been in the experience of saving lives before with these sports and everything. What comes to mind when you think of what can happen on the playing field?
Every time you play a game involving contact, I suppose, or even in some of these cases, as you were saying, these blunt force traumas. Softball is not really a contact sport, but
it could be.
Could be, ball contact to you.
Or a bat.
True. So I think these kind of freaky things happen. I think it does raise our appreciation for being able to play a game. So sometimes when you see these athletes come on, especially in my particular game, soccer or football as they call it overseas, and they come on the field and they always bless themselves, and it's just become so routine. I'm not sure how sincere. We assume the best. But I like to think that what they're really saying is, Lord, just get me through this game, help me appreciate this game, this moment, because it could be my last. And having done a little research here on this particular situation, it sounds like this was his anthem, which was he did legitimately appreciate the gift that sport is to him, which is great.
Yeah.
And I think again, we're back to the importance of sport, but it's also just the participation in it. So there are risks to everything in life, right? I mean, when you get in your car, there are certain risks and so forth. And I think probably maybe for some of the wrong reasons sometimes, money-driven motivations, right? Sports have tried to mitigate as much of the potential dangers involved in it, right? Certainly in a sport like football, where you have incredibly sized men who are incredibly strong, incredibly fast, with hard equipment on themselves, it's amazing that there aren't more injuries, to be honest with you. I mean, it really is. It's phenomenal. And I've worked with a lot of pro players in my life, and you should see some of them after a game. I mean, their whole ribs and sides could be just black and blue from hits they've taken and so forth. They have a high pain tolerance to start with in some ways. But yeah, there's certainly risk, and I think, again, not always for the right motivation, but I think sports like football with concussions, for example, we're understanding more and more about concussions. This particular injury is a little bit more rare. I wouldn't say this is a normal injury that comes about in football, but it does, to your point, highlight, well, what about other injuries like concussions and brain damage and these other kinds of things that are really serious? And in the moment they don't seem so serious, but 5 years from now or 10 years from now, they start to get real for people. So
I think the as far as the risk is concerned, I think it certainly underscores the risk and it highlights it in a lot of ways, like you said. Yeah. But it's interesting the perspective that people can have on that, because when I watch a game, having the medical background that I do, I'm looking for different things, like especially on our sidelines, and to me a good game is no one got hurt.
Right.
and did we win or no lose? Okay, that's almost secondary to everyone made it off.
Right.
And so just to have that perspective and
you have the right priorities.
Perhaps maybe.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that to me the risk isn't the feature. The competition and the outcome and the enjoyment that comes with that is what we like about sports, and the risk is inherent in it.
That's right.
And I guess someone's perspective may lead them to ultimately appreciate one or the other, right?
Right.
But it's just I guess it's a mindset shift from
and there's been so many advances on the sports medicine side, and also even on the strength and conditioning side.
On the rules too, a lot of rules have changed.
So there's this movement to try to ensure, while keeping it a sport. In other words, if you get so far that you just nothing can happen to anybody, then you don't have a sport anymore, right? Yeah. So it's a challenge, I think, and I think what probably bothers people the most is when they believe that money trumps everything, including someone's health, and that we're willing to use people in order to get, quote, our satisfaction. It's almost like the Roman, Colosseum, right? We're bred to circus. We just want our entertainment, and we don't really care what's happening to human beings that go on. Right. We try, obviously, here, we have a much different understanding of the human person. So we still want the highest level performance possible, because that's, again, going back to using all your skills, talents, and ability that God has blessed you with. But at the same time, doing it with sportsmanship, doing it, not taking cheap shots on anybody or doing any of those kinds of things. Right. But to your point, things do happen. I mean, somebody can injure a knee, something can happen through no fault of anybody's. Everybody did the right training, we had the right equipment, and life still happens.
It's called an accident for a reason.
That's right, yeah.
And I also think, just to maybe elaborate that point a little bit, I think there's been a real push in the last 5 or 10 years to move away from the violence as the spectacle. I think about, you're watching this segment called Jacked Up on NFL Live, where it literally highlights the biggest hits of the week. Wow. And players that, getting up and they're all dizzy and things, that you don't see that anymore. And and a sport like wrestling on campus here they have rules. Like, it's not just go out and try to beat each other up. There's rules and regulations for what you can and can't do. And a lot of that is driven by player safety, but also trying to keep the integrity of the sport, like you said. Yeah. I mean, soccer's had rule changes too, I'm sure, that help to some of the protective equipment and things like that are.
And there's a lot of current discussion going on about heading.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes. Like as you said, you don't want to see a sport stripped down to pure safety and then it's lost its elements. But in a litigious society as well, when these former pros start going through head injuries, punch drunk as they call them, and that kind of stuff, and they start to look around and sue the English Football Association for brain damage, etc., etc. The writing may be on the wall that we go through a period where we maybe move heavily pendulum-wise to one side, where it becomes uber safety conscious, and then kind of moderate back, so as not to ruin the sport. So I think we're probably headed for that in the not too distant future. We're already seeing signs of that in most of the big contact sports, rugby included.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you want to take a pause when these things happen, but you also don't want to live in fear. You know, I'm not immersed in the sports, industry right now, but I think the overall culture right now is kind of like become more towards the fear side of, like always worried, like what am I going to get? Because, COVID was this big thing that happened to all of us. But I think ultimately it's like, well, we have to move on. We can't live in fear. So I think that also goes with the general theme of what we're seeing out in culture.
Even with the Olympics, the Citius, Altius, Fortius, the faster, stronger, higher, it's challenging every human being to literally be the most they're capable of being. And like anything in life, when you're trying to take something to an extreme, it's a challenge, right? That you don't cross a line. But often people are training at incredibly high levels that most people don't get to see on a daily basis. And you just look at the weights people are lifting and so forth. And so injuries can happen. Everybody tries again. You want to make sure your technique is sound, because technique very often can mitigate a lot of problems. Usually it's bad technique that lends itself to injuries and so forth. But just the nature of sport itself and human beings striving to be everything they can be, sounds like an army slogan, right? But it's that desire to literally double the talents, to be everything you can be. Yeah. And in doing that, that means at times you're probably brushing close to the edge of being injured in some way. Even, you could say, well, track and field, you're not even in a contact sport.
Right.
Well, you can tear a hamstring because you've been pushing yourself, you've been running, you're going at certain speeds, and you didn't give yourself enough recovery, or your flexibility is not there, or there's a weakness in your gluteus medius, or whatever, right? It's some imbalance that causes that injury.
Right.
Because you wanted to run as fast as you can run, and we're measuring this in hundredths of a second, sometimes thousands of a second.
And then I think another aspect of the whole conversation is that this was on live national news. But there's, as you both know, there's injuries that happen that aren't on such a large scale. Yes. So could we talk a little bit about that in the pursuit? We've already kind of touched on it, but in the pursuit of competition, where does pure virtue come in terms of, especially in at Belmont Abbey? How do you kind of balance that out where the players aren't a means to an end? They're actually, like, we care about their lives. We care about, their health and safety. And we've kind of already touched on it. But have we lost the true value of sport, I guess, is the question on the professional level, in y'all's opinions?
Well, I guess I'll defend ESPN a little bit in a almost impossible circumstance. The coverage of it was pretty fair, I thought. I mean, there wasn't a lot of close-up camera shots on the medical team doing their work. It was a lot of wide shots and a lot of commercials, and you can read into that what you want about ESPN trying to keep their advertisers happy or whatever. But I thought from a coverage standpoint, it was being someone who may have been on the field in that situation. That's about what I would have expected, and I would have appreciated, the spotlight not being on the care and being elsewhere.
Right.
I think for us the triangle approach of body, mind, and spirit, is something that we keep pretty front and center. It's hard to get away from it. And even our conference has adopted that as kind of slogan and motto. So
I don't think there's another conference in the country that has a motto that says champions in body, mind, and soul.
I love that. It's awesome.
And I would say that I would make the argument that when you pursue virtue, you're not giving anything up. I mean, I think sometimes there's this sense of like, well, if I'm kind of a good person or a virtuous person, then I really can't perform at a high level. And I would argue just the opposite. What we see sometimes is somebody who maybe is pursuing vice or living a life of vice, who performs at a very high level, and we make an assumption, well, I guess, you just have to accept that because that's the high level. What we don't realize is that take any world-class athlete.
Right.
And if you said, let me have comparable world-class athletes, one who's pursuing virtue, one who's pursuing vice, this person is going to outperform this person.
Right.
It's just a matter of what that ability is. But it is something that if it's not intentional, it just isn't going to happen. So you've done such a tremendous job with your athletes, and I think they've come to think of it as just normal.
Well, it's the approach to injuries has certainly evolved, I think, for coaches. Mostly because of concussions. Certainly in my playing days, and you would have experienced the same thing, the phrase, he got his bell rung, or his, those kind of phrases were kind of typical and just kind of move on, and those were fine and well. But now that we've inherited players as coaches, it's a different mindset, because now as the research becomes more definitive, we're realizing that these head injuries are serious. So maybe if I was a coach 20, 25 years ago, I'd be like, listen, can you play tomorrow? How do you feel? Okay, coach. All right, get in there. It's not that anymore. It's certainly now our biggest challenge is actually telling the athlete, no, you will not play. Wow. Coach, I think I can cheat the concussion test. I'm not interested in you cheating the concussion test. I want your brain to be healthy when you're 35 visiting as an alumni at homecoming.
Right. Yeah.
This is one game in your life. Let's not worry about that. And all the coaches that I'm familiar with at this college, that's their general approach. Look, we're always looking for the soft athlete, maybe, who is trying to beg out of running, let's say, for that reason. Maybe he just doesn't want to get tired. But for the most part, the athletes here want to get tired because they know it makes them better. We have to actually regulate them. They're the biggest issue right now, is making sure that they're being safe for themselves.
But I know you pursue virtue formation with your players. Do you think that has an impact on the way they're able to play ultimately? In other words, getting their abilities out and performing at whatever their best ability is?
I think so, in the way we watch them win and the way we watch them lose. The reaction the next day usually tells us that they have this thing in a kind of virtuous perspective. If they're throwing things all the way around the locker room, then I'd be thinking you've lost perspective of this. You've lost the opportunity to think about getting better, which is chasing virtue. Likewise, if they were casual about the next game because they just beaten the last opponent, I'd worry about arrogance. So we try and just find them right in the middle, which is...
But you do this virtue thing at the beginning of the year, don't you? Don't they all sign like a...
Yep, we have this core value certificate, and they really are virtues, but dressed up as characteristics, selflessness, that kind of stuff. It's, and so they memorize them.
Wow.
And then on the first day of season, they have to regurgitate them word for word.
That's awesome.
And then they sign off on a somewhat of quite a promise, I suppose, to try and live out these core values over their 4 years. And so we've heard really neat stories from some of the alumni that will call in out of nowhere and say, alongside my Belmont Abbey college diploma on the wall of my legal office is the core value certificate.
Wow, that's awesome.
And that's kind of nice, because what it's saying is that the academic part of what they received here is as important as the faith and kind of virtue piece.
Yeah, I expect that balance. Yeah.
Do you have any stories, Dr. Thierfelder, from your time of...
I got plenty of stories. I don't know if they relate to anything we're going to talk about here.
Well, from your time in athletic and professional athletic sports medicine, of that virtue and vice within a... you don't have to say names, but were there any examples that you saw with coaching athletes before they would even get to the field with psychology, where you would help them through the virtue and vice struggle that helped them, then you saw a difference on the field maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say to you is most athletes typically will come to any of us, right, with something physical. Yeah. That they want this just one thing. I just want to improve this one thing, and then they think it's going to take care of everything. Right. And as we all know, as we look at them, well, actually, you don't need one thing, you need 15 things, okay? And even the 15 are made up of smaller things, right, in some way, and they don't realize that. So what you try to do initially with an athlete is you got to try to pull them in to start with, right? Yeah. So I'll usually do something literally in the first session with an athlete that they will see themselves actually having gotten dramatically better physically, right? And as soon as you've done that, they're like, okay, what else do you have, right? And so what they come to quickly understand is that, okay, the physical is great, but you don't get physical if you don't have mental.
Right.
And then what's really interesting is once they get that, they realize, but that doesn't really solve how I'm going to deal with the deeper things in life, the deeper issues of sacrifice and how I'm going to deal with relationships I have and all these other kinds of things.
Right.
And they suddenly realize the spiritual part of my life is actually the most important of my life.
Right.
So again, it's each of those athletes, and I can just tell you, I won't say his name, but
I had one guy who was in the Super Bowl. He was a Super Bowl champion, started in a Super Bowl, got traded to another team. The other team, the coach didn't want him at all and really sabotaged him, tried to do everything in the world to make his life difficult and not successful. GM had brought him in, but not this position's coach, and made life miserable for him. And he was given complete junk plays. Guy who was used to being in on 65 or 70 plays a game was suddenly getting 10 or 12 plays, and he was getting them at the end of the game, and he was getting them on downs that you almost couldn't do anything in. And he had, from the time I started with him to this time, he was able to go into those situations incredibly grateful and joyful. And he had the mentality that if I just had one more play in my whole life, this play right now, I could never be thankful enough to God for just this one play. And what's interesting about this guy is he ended up going on to set the interception record for linebackers in a single season with those few plays at the end of every game.
That's incredible.
And he made some incredible plays and scored touchdowns off some of his interceptions. I mean, just incredible. And he was at such peace and had such joy, even though he was put in this completely adverse situation, and still performed at a level. And he often said to me, I wish I had known all of this when I was actually starting and playing, because I can only imagine what I would have done then compared to what I'm able to do now. But he had a completely different view on life. He was at peace. He was joyful. Things didn't get him down. Didn't matter what coaches, media, or anybody else did with him.
That's awesome. I think that's just a testament to what we've been talking about, which is the body, mind, and soul are so connected.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of Belmont Abbey that I see here is that it's all equal value. If not, the soul is is of greater value than the other two. Okay, ending with a little spicy question. Feel free to jump in, or you can pass the baton if you don't want to chime in. But this has gained a lot of media attention during a time where we are seeing some other health issues off of the football field. A lot of people talk about the vaccine having some reactions, some possible reactions. But what we see with Damar is that anytime this topic has been brought up, was there a connection or a link to the vaccine, it has been pretty shut down immediately. What does this bring up in terms of pursuit of truth as a community? Do we think that it's good and respectful during a time like this to not go there at all? Or should we be asking the question, was there an underlying connection at all? Again, feel free if you want to pass or take it.
I could jump in first and just say that in this specific, now again, you got to realize we're outside of this. So we don't know him, we don't know the whole medical record or anything else. I would just say in this particular instance, I don't think this had anything to do with vaccines or anything else. I just think this was such a unique situation. You know exactly what caused it, how it was caused. It's a known thing. It's a known problem, right? Yeah. But to your point about the truth, which I think is what brings so much angst to all of us today, is that when God is removed from our culture and society, that means morality is removed. That means that there's too many people accepting that there are no objective truths. And then it becomes this relativism of your truth, my truth. And then we're put in a terrible situation of every single time somebody says something, of doubting them. Because I don't know how to trust you. I don't know, how do I know if that's true or not true? Yeah. So I think there's a crisis of truth in our culture and society today. We shouldn't be on either political side. You can have whatever views you want, but we should all be of goodwill. We should all be pursuing objective truth and wanting to know ultimately what is true. Right. I mean, I don't know. I can live with that. Like, even if I have an opinion, if you objectively show me I'm wrong about this, right? I have to have enough humility to say, you know what, I was wrong. I thought I was pretty sure about this, but you've made it clear to me now. I'm convinced that this is actually objectively true, and so I then need to change. And vice versa. If it happened the opposite, then hopefully you, because you're of goodwill and just really want to know what is true, if we were all living this way together, we'd have far less problems than we have today. It's everybody has an opinion, and it doesn't have to be based on anything, and that opinion is now considered fact and truth, when in fact it's not.
And I think the interesting thing about stuff like this is that there's really only a small group of people that know what the actual truth is, and that's Damar Hamlin and his family, and the people that were caring for him, and the doctors, and everything you saw from them was very measured and very careful and very respectful of the privacy and things like that. So I don't know that we may never know the truth necessarily about what happened, but I don't know that we really need to. I think there's times we can seek truth without knowing the full medical record, is what I'm getting at, I think. And those that know the truth are bound by medical privacy laws and other things that would prevent them from being able to talk about it, unless Damar were to come out and say, here's the truth. And then, to your point, those that had potentially opinions about what happened would need to be open to receiving that truth and recognizing that as the truth and going from there.
So, for example, if it's commotio cordis, which is what happened, which is this blunt trauma to the chest cavity, which actually is what sent his heart into a ventricular arrhythmia. If that's true, that came from that very acute incident that occurred at that moment. Now, somebody can say, well, was there maybe something else happened to his heart? That's not what that is. That has to do with being hit in the chest at a particular moment of your heartbeat, and that causes the ventricular part of your heart, the lower chambers of your heart, to in a sense, vibrate rather than beat. That came from that. I mean, it's like saying I got hit by a car. Did COVID have anything to do with it? Well, you got hit by a car, And so I think in this particular instance, it has nothing to do with it, but it brings up the point that people, even in goodwill, are saying, well, maybe, because I don't know. Like, could it be? Because I don't know what this commotio cordis is. I don't even know that was the name. I don't even know what happened to his chest. It's just a heart thing. And I've heard heart things, something happened with vaccines with heart things. And so, again, we're all left unsure. And this is actually why being truthful is so important. Because it affects all of us. It affects the body of Christ. It affects all of us to be truthful and to do it to the best of our abilities. And again, to have goodwill and to be always seeking the objective truth in all that we do.
I like that point that you made about how we're in such a heightened, truth is so relative that we're all, it's almost like we're in a culture of not trusting because it's become so relative. So I think it's interesting to point that out, that this was a known thing that happens to athletes. And because there's other conversations about hearts and the vaccine that it could easily be tied. And again, like you said, we'll never know. But is that the main conversation that we're having? It's mainly about this young man's life and the greater purpose of sports. But for a lighter ending note, what is on the horizon for Belmont Abbey sports? Is there anything exciting coming in the spring? Any teams that we should be looking out for?
Everything's exciting.
Obviously, every sport. But are there any highlights? Any new players that are exciting to be on the lookout for, or a team that you could share with the community?
Well, I'll just say this. I shared this on Instagram a couple of days ago. We just hired 2 new athletic trainers to join our staff, so we're going to be a full staff of 7 total staff members this year. So I'm very excited about that, and mainly because now we can serve our students at a greater capacity without burning out current staff.
And can I just say, that is no small accomplishment, because right now, if you go out into the world, it is almost impossible to find athletic trainers at schools. Most schools are down numbers of athletic trainers. So it says something about Adam and the coaches and the sport and virtue that's here that helps draw individuals here beyond it's just a job. There's something more going on here.
That's exciting. That's
it is.
exciting.
So then obviously the hospital, like I mentioned earlier, that's very exciting for whenever that comes online in the next couple of years. I think is probably going to be a reality. So
that'll probably be a a huge relief to know if something were to happen.
Yeah,
it's right down the road.
It's right in the backyard.
Well, I have that relief knowing he's over there.
I'm just happy to work with the best coaches in America, the best coaching department. I mean, they really are.
Awesome.
They're outstanding. So it's an honor to work here. So it's always an exciting day at the Abbey when you get to be a coach. It's a great way to make a living,
Absolutely.
Well, it's also, I told you about John. He was one of the first to come when we were starting the whole sport and virtue piece. And it's taken a long time, but I would say now we have that critical mass of coaches. Almost all our coaches are they get this. And you cannot affect sport and virtue in the way that we're talking about it, where you're still going for high level performance and the fullness of being human, right? You can't do that if you don't have the right coaches. So it starts there. So the fact that we have our coaches committed to this in their own personal lives, and they're able to do it and still coach at a very high level is really extraordinary. And I go back to just look at the size of the athletic program at Belmont Abbey College. I mean, when I say we're the 7th largest, I mean, do you know, like the largest are like Cornell, Harvard, Princeton, University of Michigan, Ohio State. Yeah. I mean, these are the schools that we're in with. This is Belmont Abbey College, a small liberal arts Catholic college, you know, in the South. So it is amazing, you know, what we're doing. And I would say it would be impossible if we didn't have the coaches and the athletic staff and athletic trainer staff that we have. I mean, it's a tribute. I know I'm sounding like I'm maybe bragging. I'm not being boastful at all.
No.
I'm hopefully doing this in all humility, just saying I've never seen anything like this at any level. What's happening here?
To your point, we did over Christmas, we did a 12 days of Christmas giveaway on social media, primarily to alumni. And one day we gave away a lot of Belmont Abbey athletic swag. And the challenge was, you know, comment your favorite Belmont Abbey sport or memory. So many alum said, if it weren't for Belmont Abbey, you know, I would never have gotten to play golf. I would never have gotten to play, you know, and they listed their sports and their memories. And you could tell, like, these were alum from like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So it was really cool to read through those and just to see the legacy that you guys are building and growing more than it was even in the past. So thank you all for sharing with us today. Would anyone, in light of the topic, just want to end us in prayer?
Sure. I'll just say, dear Lord, we thank you for this day, and we ask you to help us to be truly grateful for all that we have, to bless Damar and all players, those that aren't seen, and all those that are behind the scenes, the athletic trainers, the doctors, the coaches, the staff, all those that are seeking God's greater glory in all that we do. And we ask to know your will and to do your will and accept your will in all things. And we ask all of this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.